Let's dive in and explore what's at stake in this pivotal moment for American law. A major legal battle has erupted, shaking the very foundations of American gun law and drawing national attention. The National Firearms Act, or NFA, has regulated certain types of firearms, like machine guns, suppressors, and short-barreled rifles, since 1934, shaping the landscape of gun ownership for nearly a century. Now, after decades of enforcement, that law faces its most significant and potentially transformative challenge yet. Gun Owners of America, a prominent advocacy group, joined by the support of 15 states, has filed a high-profile lawsuit directly targeting the NFA's strict registration requirements. The catalyst for this legal showdown? The recently passed One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which dramatically slashed the tax on suppressors and short-barreled rifles to zero, upending the law's financial foundation. Plaintiffs argue that without the tax, the NFA loses its constitutional justification, and its authority to regulate these firearms is now in question. This case isn't just about a single law, it's a high-stakes clash over the meaning of the Second Amendment and the limits of federal power in regulating firearms. Gun rights advocates argue the NFA is outdated, overly restrictive, and places unnecessary burdens on law-abiding citizens who wish to exercise their constitutional rights. Meanwhile, gun safety groups warn that rolling back these regulations could threaten public safety and lead to increased gun violence. The outcome of this case could reshape federal firearms law for generations to come, setting a precedent that will echo through American legal history. As the nation watches, this is just the beginning of what promises to be a historic and fiercely contested legal fight. How did the challengers build their case? They meticulously pieced together a strategy that would challenge the very essence of the law. They used history against the government, delving deep into the origins and intentions behind the legislation. The Supreme Court originally upheld the NFA as a tax law, not as gun control, a crucial distinction that the challengers seized upon. With the tax now at zero for many items, gun rights groups argued the law's foundation had vanished, leaving it without a leg to stand on. If there's no tax, they asked, what's the constitutional justification for registration? This question struck at the heart of the law's validity. They also argued the Commerce Clause doesn't apply to firearms kept within a state, challenging federal overreach. The lawsuit sought to block enforcement of registration for untaxed items, affecting millions of gun owners across the nation. The NFA's background checks, waiting periods, and registry were now seen as legally baseless for these items, raising questions about their future. The government faced a tough choice: defend the NFA on new grounds or admit its justification was gone, a decision with far-reaching implications. Everything hinged on this single critical point, a pivotal moment that could redefine the landscape of gun legislation in the United States. Most expected a long court battle, maybe even a Supreme Court showdown. But then, the Department of Justice made a stunning move. It conceded the main point. The DOJ agreed that without a tax, the NFA's registration scheme lost its constitutional foundation. Suddenly both sides were aligned, leaving the Supreme Court with no real dispute to resolve. The government's brief suggested defending the law was futile, given the court's current stance on gun rights. By conceding, the DOJ may have hoped to avoid a sweeping ruling that could threaten other regulations. This reversal was a game-changer, removing the main opposition to the lawsuit. The effect was immediate. The path was cleared for a swift resolution. The legal landscape shifted overnight. With the Department of Justice conceding its position, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous and decisive ruling that sent shockwaves through the legal and firearms communities. The court determined that, because the National Firearms Act was upheld as a tax law, requiring registration for items that were not taxed was unconstitutional and could not stand. While the decision did not strike down the entire NFA, it effectively ended federal registration requirements for suppressors, short-barreled rifles, and similar items, fundamentally changing how these firearms are regulated. For millions of gun owners across the country, the process changed overnight. No more lengthy forms, no more waiting periods, and no more $200 tax to legally own these items. The bureaucratic hurdles that had frustrated so many were suddenly gone. Gun rights advocates celebrated what they saw as a historic rollback of federal gun control, calling it a victory for personal freedom and the Second Amendment. The NFA's strict rules for machine guns and certain other firearms remain in place, but a major pillar of federal regulation has now been removed, altering the landscape of gun laws in America. Meanwhile, gun safety groups and lawmakers voiced alarm, warning that this decision could undermine public safety and make it harder to track dangerous weapons. They argue that federal registration provided crucial oversight, helping law enforcement keep dangerous items out of the wrong hands and maintain accountability. The debate over whether this ruling makes America safer or more dangerous is now front and center, with passionate arguments on both sides dominating headlines and news coverage. The impact of the Supreme Court's decision is immediate and profound, reshaping the national conversation on gun rights and regulation for years to come. This Supreme Court decision marks a new era for federal gun control. The ruling sets a precedent. Federal regulations must be clearly tied to constitutional powers like taxing. Experts predict new lawsuits challenging other gun laws. The fight over gun control will now shift to the states, creating an even patchier legal landscape. Some states will add their own registration rules, others will protect access, deepening the national divide. Both gun rights and gun safety groups are mobilizing for the next battles. The legal and political terrain has been fundamentally reshaped. The debate continues, but the rules have changed, and we'll be watching what happens next.